Alright, so pre-Ironman on 2-inch spacer lift is just over, is that about 12.5 inches. And then the driver front tire, in front of the rear tire is closer to, I'd say 13. So we'll see what that's like afterwards. So front was about 12.5, the rear was about 13 with 2-inch spacer. I was wondering how different these looked in size. So this is a stock front strut with the spacer on top, and this is a Ironman kit. You can tell this one's about the same height. Look at this difference though. For example, you put a piston shaft there, and then first of all, this boot's a lot heavier duty, but it's hard to tell. But those are, I don't know, maybe not twice as big, but probably 150% bigger. So that's the difference. It looks like a picture up there.
Oh, you won't do it this time. Come on. Hit your head, hit your head, hit your head.
Alright, so I've had the Ironman lift installed for several days now, driven it around a whole lot, gotten it aligned, took it around town, probably put, I don't know, 100 miles on it in the last couple days or so. So now we're going to remeasure. The suspension should have settled some. I'm sure it'll settle some more over the next couple weeks, but after about 100 miles in several days, it's at 13 inches on the front. So before it was at 12.5. So at least where it's at now, unless it settles a little more, which it may, I'm actually at 13 in the front, where I was at 12.5. And then on the rear, I believe I was at 13, and now I'm at a pretty solid 14, 13 3/4, but real close to 14 in the rear. I think that's really based on the subframe drop in the rear, gave me that extra boost. It's interesting because when I was looking at it for a moment, I thought, oh, I actually may have lost some height. But I think that's because now the rear sits a little bit higher than the front. With the 2-inch body armor kit, which is actually 2 inches in the front and really closer to like 1.5 inches in the rear, it actually keeps it just about level. Now with the subframe drop in the rear being a true 2 inches, the rear is actually higher, and so it's got a little bit of a rake, which is good if you're carrying gear in the back or towing. But at first I thought I lost some height, but it's actually just because the optics of things make it look like it's dropped, but it's actually taller. I've not had the Ironman suspension off-road yet. On-road, I would 110% say it feels better. It soaks up bumps way better. The best way that I can kind of describe the feel of the suspension is that you have the smoothness of aired down tires with the acceleration and the handling of tires at road PSI. I don't know if that'll make any sense at all, but that's the best way I can kind of describe it. So you've got the feel of the absorption of, like 20, 25 PSI. So it's nice and soft and cushiony and comfortable, but you're not, slow and sluggish because you have like low PSI. That's kind of the best way I can kind of describe it. If anybody's wondering, like, what does it feel like? It's really hard to describe that through video, obviously, without driving in it. But I would say, feels like the tires are at 20 to 25 PSI, but it handles like they're at 35 to 40 PSI. I do not get body rock anymore. And what I mean is, I used to go over bumps or speed bumps, and then you'd feel the body rock a little bit, right? So you hit the bump, go over it, and then you feel the body shift. It doesn't really do that anymore. Now you go over a bump, you feel a little bit of bump, and that's it. And it's back to stable ground. So that actually has inspired a lot of confidence. The other thing is, in the corners, it's oddly more compliant, but more comfortable at the same time. Again, really hard to describe and explain, but on turns and cornering, it's actually more comfortable. But also, I don't know, it's not stiffer, but it's more comfortable. I think the subframe drop in the rear might have had a lot to do with that, because now the rear architecture is more accurate. The other thing that I would note, because not many people that I know of who went from the 2-inch spatial lift to the Ironman kit, is that now that I did the subframe drop in the back, I don't seem to get any of that transmission stutter. And what I mean is, if you go watch, John DZ did a video on this years ago. When you lift a Subaru, sometimes the transmission mount has a tendency to get a little bit loose in the middle of the subframe because the geometry is off. I didn't notice how badly I felt that until I did the subframe drop at the rear. So I chalked it up to just really, really aggressive tires, and that being where that feeling was coming from. I know, it's really, really dirty, but it's used, so that's why that happens. But now that I did the subframe drop in the rear, on acceleration, it's super smooth again. So if you're on the 2-inch spatial lift, you may not think that you feel it, but once you drop the subframe, you will feel it. And I apologize for the audio at the beginning of the video. I have a phone case on, and it kind of muffles the mic and gives it like a rattling effect, but I'll definitely do another update once I've had an opportunity to take it out on a trail. I just want to report back. I'm happy to say I gained 1/2 inch in the front, 1 inch in the rear. Let me go measure skid plate to the ground and see what my clearance is at now. Measure at the same time. So it's about 11 inches and 11 and a half, 11 and a quarter. We'll say 11 and a quarter, because the bend is, I don't know, it's probably closer to 11 and a half, but we'll say 11 and a quarter. So 11 and a quarter at the front. Let's go measure the rear diff. Sorry this is crooked, but it's really hard to hold this at the same time. It's right at about 10 and a half inches at the rear diff. And that's just about, I think, the lowest point in the rear center of the vehicle. But they look great, they feel great. The material quality is outstanding, just based on feel and then my very, very brief experience on the road with them. So I highly recommend them. Let me know if you guys have any questions in the comments. More compliant suspension because it's not at such an angle. Your bushings are going to last longer. Your CV axles are going to last longer because they're basically at a factory angle now instead of being like this. The only real downside, well, there's two, I guess, is your lower trailing control arm is a little bit lower now because it's dropped 2 inches, and then my rear diff is now approximately 2 inches lower. So, you know, something to keep in mind, but for long-term wear, this is going to be better for your CV axles, for all your bushings, and also, as I mentioned, I feel like the drivetrain smoothness is better with the subframe drop than it was with the subframe up and out of alignment with the front. The only thing I'll have to be mindful of is there's some things that now this may hit on if I'm not careful, and my center diff may hit on that it didn't before, but I still think that the subframe drop is a good idea. Just because, like all the things I mentioned, more compliant road handling, it's going to allow your suspension more travel because now it's got more up and down room versus it already stretched out. Sorry, I got paint on my hands from painting. Instead of it being stretched out all the way, it really doesn't have much travel, and now it really has full articulation opportunities. CV axles are going to last longer, and the bushings will all last longer as well. So it's okay. I mean, it just lowers a couple of bits in the back, so something to be mindful of.